the scene that wasn't acting anymore. Hollywood sets are usually loud. Crew members adjusting lights, assistants whispering into headsets, someone asking for coffee, someone fixing a prop, someone checking continuity. Even during emotional scenes, there's always a hum, a mechanical awareness that this is work. But on that November morning in 1997, inside a modest office set in Toronto doubling as a therapist's room, something different was happening. They were filming a pivotal moment for Good Will Hunting. On paper, it was simple. A therapist gently breaking through a young man's emotional armor. 3 repetitions of the line, "It's not your fault." A scripted breakdown, tears, cut. Clean, controlled, professional. But nothing about that day would stay controlled. Matt Damon was 27, thin, intense, driven. He wasn't just starring in the film, he had co-written it with his childhood best friend, Ben Affleck. The script had been their long shot, their gamble, their way out of obscurity. And it was personal. The character Will Hunting, a brilliant but emotionally barricaded young man from Cambridge, wasn't autobiography. But it wasn't fiction either. It was built from fragments of lived truth, the insecurity of not feeling enough, the silent pressure of expectations, the complicated gravity between father and son. Matt had poured something into that script he didn't fully talk about. Robin Williams knew that. Robin wasn't just playing a therapist. He was playing the emotional anchor of the story, the father figure Will never had, the voice of compassion, the safe place. But Robin understood something most actors don't risk touching. Emotional truth doesn't respond to choreography. You cannot schedule healing. Before cameras rolled that morning, Robin pulled director Gus Van Sant aside. No dramatics, no spectacle, just quiet seriousness. "This scene," Robin said gently, "isn't about performance." He explained what he felt, that Matt had written something from deep inside himself, that the words weren't theoretical, that if they treated the moment like a regular scripted beat, it would land, but it wouldn't transcend. Robin believed the scene needed something unpredictable. Gus listened. He trusted actors, he trusted instinct, he trusted risk when done with care. The decision wasn't about manipulation. It wasn't about surprise for shock value. It was about staying present long enough for the armor to crack naturally. When they sat down in those chairs, therapist and patient, there were cameras, yes. There were crew members. There was a script supervisor ready with notes. But once action was called, the room shrank. Robin softened his voice. He leaned in slightly, not theatrically, just human. "It's not your fault." Matt responded exactly as rehearsed, controlled, guarded, deflecting. Robin said it again. "It's not your fault." Still controlled, still performing. The third time came. According to the script, this was where the breakdown should begin. But Robin didn't stop. "It's not your fault." A small pause. Matt blinked, not as Will Hunting. As Matt Damon, a flicker of surprise, a recalibration. Robin didn't push aggressively. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He simply stayed. "It's not your fault." The repetition changed rhythm. It wasn't dialogue anymore. It became presence. Something in Matt's breathing shifted. The line came again. "It's not your fault." The defense mechanisms began to weaken, not because of volume, but because of consistency, because of gentleness that refused to retreat. There's a specific moment, you can see it in the film, where Matt's jaw tightens, then loosens. His eyes try to stay steady, then flicker. That's the exact second the acting dissolves. The tears that follow are not cinematic tears. They are uneven, disruptive, childlike. Robin moved closer, no rush, no triumph. He wrapped his arms around him. And he stayed there. No one on set spoke. The camera kept rolling. This wasn't exploitation. It wasn't trickery. It was trust, an unspoken understanding between two actors who respected each other enough to go somewhere vulnerable. When Gus finally called cut, the silence lingered. Matt wasn't angry. He wasn't embarrassed. He was quiet, processing. Robin checked in softly, "You okay?" And that question mattered more than the improvisation. Because what made that moment powerful wasn't surprise. It was safety. Robin had not cornered him. He had held the space long enough for something real to surface. Later, when the film was released, audiences would call that scene devastating, authentic, unforgettable. They were right, but what they were feeling wasn't technical brilliance. They were feeling what happens when someone looks at another human being and refuses to let them carry shame alone. That's what Robin understood better than most. Not just timing, not just comedy, but the fragile architecture of human defense. He knew when to be wild. He also knew when to be still. And in that stillness, he gave a young actor something rare, permission to drop the mask. The power of that scene didn't come from breaking someone. It came from meeting them. And that difference, that care, is what turned a well-written film into something timeless. Two unknown kids and the actor who said yes. Before the awards, before the standing ovations, before the world knew their names. There were just two broke actors with a script nobody quite understood. In 1994, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck were not Hollywood power players. They were roommates, dreamers, young men driving across Los Angeles in beat-up cars, auditioning for roles that barely paid rent. They had one asset, a script. What became Good Will Hunting didn't begin as a polished masterpiece. It started as a class assignment Matt had written while studying at Harvard, a rough draft about a math genius entangled in government conspiracies. Ben read it and said what real friends say. This isn't the movie. So they rewrote it. They stripped away the thriller elements, removed the espionage, cut the flashy distractions. What remained was something smaller and far more dangerous. A wounded kid. A therapist. A conversation about shame. That was the real story. Studios didn't immediately get it. Executives loved the genius janitor angle. They loved the math. They loved the potential prestige. But they kept circling back to one note. Can we make it bigger? Meaning louder. More commercial. Less intimate. Matt and Ben resisted. That therapy arc, the emotional spine, was non-negotiable. Without it, the movie was clever but hollow. Eventually, Castle Rock bought the script. The deal gave them money, $600,000, a life-changing amount at the time, but it didn't guarantee creative control. And that was the real battle. They needed the right director. They needed the right therapist. And that role, Sean Maguire, could not be miscast. It required warmth without sentimentality, authority without ego, humor without cruelty. They needed someone who could feel like a father figure without performing fatherhood. Enter Robin Williams. At that point, Robin was already a legend. He had exploded into fame through Mork and Mindy, stunned audiences with Dead Poets Society, and proven his dramatic depth in Good Morning, Vietnam. He was box office. He was respected. He didn't need this small script from two unknown writers. But when Robin read it, something clicked. He saw beyond the plot. He recognized the emotional architecture. Robin had always been sensitive to hidden grief. Beneath his lightning-fast improvisation and explosive comedy was someone deeply observant. He understood men who hid pain behind intellect. He understood humor as armor. And he saw that Will Hunting wasn't just a genius. He was scared. When Robin met Matt and Ben for the first time, there was no arrogance in the room. No Hollywood hierarchy, just three actors talking craft. Robin didn't lecture them. He asked questions. Why does Sean say this here? Why does Will deflect with a joke in this moment? What's he protecting? Matt realized quickly that Robin wasn't auditioning for the part. He was honoring it. There's something powerful about being taken seriously by someone you've admired your whole life. For Matt, sitting across from Robin was surreal. This was the man who made him laugh as a kid, the man whose films had shaped him. Now that same man was dissecting his writing with care. And then Robin did something unexpected. He didn't ask for rewrites. He didn't demand adjustments. He didn't try to dominate the script. He said yes. But there was one condition. The therapy scenes had to breathe. No rushing. No melodrama. No cutting emotional beats short for pacing. If they were going to do this, they were going to do it honestly. Director Gus Van Sant came aboard not long after. Gus was known for quiet films, observational, patient, character-driven. He wasn't interested in glossy Hollywood pacing either. It was the right combination. Young writers hungry to protect their truth. A director comfortable with silence. An actor unafraid of stillness. Production began in 1997. The set wasn't extravagant, the budget was modest. No one was treating this like a blockbuster. But something was forming. Robin quickly became more than a co-star. He became a stabilizing force. Fame didn't hover around him like armor. He made crew members laugh. He improvised between takes. He dissolved tension. Yet when cameras rolled, he was disciplined. He understood something Matt and Ben were still learning. Comedy can disarm, but empathy transforms. In early scenes, Robin improvised small touches, a glance, a sigh, an off-script memory. Gus allowed space for exploration. Sometimes the best moments weren't on the page. Matt, who had written every word, found himself adjusting in real time. Robin wasn't hijacking scenes, he was deepening them. There's a quiet humility required for that, especially when you're the writer and the star. But Matt recognized it wasn't ego driving Robin. It was care. One afternoon between takes, Robin pulled Matt aside. "You wrote something brave," he told him. "Most people don't." Matt shrugged it off at first. Writers rarely know how to accept praise for vulnerability. But Robin wasn't flattering him. He was acknowledging the risk. To write about emotional damage without glamorizing it. To portray a man terrified of love without mocking him. To explore shame without turning it into spectacle. That's not easy. And Robin respected it. As filming progressed, a subtle shift occurred. Matt wasn't just acting opposite Robin. He was learning from him. Watching how Robin prepared. How he listened before responding. How he protected emotional moments instead of overpowering them. Mentorship doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just someone showing you what excellence looks like, up close. By the time they reached the therapy climax scene, the one that would later define the film, trust had already been built. Trust between actors. Trust between director and cast. Trust between vulnerability and craft. That trust is why the moment worked. Not because of surprise. Not because of improvisation alone. But because when Robin decided to go beyond the script, he wasn't crossing a boundary. He was stepping into a relationship already grounded in respect. And Matt, whether consciously or not, knew he was safe. That's what people miss when they tell the story. They talk about the repetition, the tears, the breakdown, but they don't talk enough about the foundation that made it possible. You can't push someone emotionally if you haven't earned the right to hold them afterward. Robin had earned it. And that's why when that final, "it's not your fault" landed not as dialogue, but as truth, it didn't feel like manipulation. It felt like release. The night the world watched, and the quiet that followed. When filming wrapped on Good Will Hunting, nobody on set believed they had made a blockbuster. They believed they had made something honest. And sometimes in Hollywood, honesty is the biggest gamble of all. The budget had been modest. The cast outside of Robin Williams was young and largely unproven. Matt Damon and Ben Affleck were still seen as hopefuls, talented, yes, but not bankable. The film premiered quietly in December 1997. Then something unexpected happened. People didn't just watch it. They felt it. Word spread, audiences lingered after screenings. Men who didn't talk about emotions found themselves talking about that therapy scene. Couples argued in parking lots about whether we should take the job or chase love. Strangers quoted lines back to each other. The movie was earning something more valuable than box office numbers. It was earning recognition. By early 1998, awards conversations began, then nominations, then the Oscars. For Matt and Ben, it was surreal. 4 years earlier, they had been two friends writing in a cramped apartment, trying to create their own opportunity. Now they were walking red carpets under flashing lights. But beneath the glamour was something deeply personal. The script they had written, the vulnerable one studios wanted to reshape, was nominated for Best Original Screenplay. and Robin was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. The 70th Academy Awards took place on March 23, 1998. The atmosphere in the theater was electric, but Matt later described feeling strangely calm, almost detached, as if he hadn't fully processed the speed of everything. When the envelope was opened and their names were read, Matt, Damon, and Ben Affleck, time fractured. They stood up, they hugged each other. They walked to the stage looking like two kids who had just broken into a party they weren't invited to and somehow won it. Their acceptance speech was chaotic and emotional. Thank yous poured out. Gratitude spilled everywhere. They weren't polished yet. They were real. But later that night came another moment. Robin's category. When Robin Williams' name was announced, the applause was thunderous. He walked to the stage, measured, humble, eyes soft. His speech was classic Robin, grateful, warm, lightly humorous. He thanked the Academy. He thanked his family. He praised the young writers who had trusted him. He did not mention the therapy improvisation. He didn't explain what had happened that day on set. Because for him, that moment had never been about awards. It had been about connection. Backstage after the ceremony, there were cameras everywhere. Champagne, interviews, chaos. But there was also a quieter exchange. Robin pulled Matt aside. He congratulated him, not like a mentor patting a student on the back, but like a peer. "You did it," he said simply. And that mattered. Because what Robin gave Matt wasn't just emotional depth in one scene. He gave him legitimacy. Hollywood can be ruthless. It can flatten young talent under pressure. Overnight fame can distort identity, but Robin's presence grounded it. He treated Matt as an equal long before the industry did. And that validation stayed. In the months following the Oscars, careers exploded. Matt was suddenly everywhere, leading roles, magazine covers, global recognition. Ben's trajectory soared too. Doors opened that once seemed permanently sealed. But success doesn't erase complexity. Fame doesn't dissolve old insecurities. In interviews years later, Matt would admit that rapid ascent is destabilizing. You question whether you deserve it, whether it's sustainable, whether you'll ever match that first lightning strike. Robin understood that feeling intimately. He had lived through meteoric rise in the late 1970s with Mork and Mindy. He knew the euphoria. He also knew the pressure that follows. He stayed in touch. Not in a grand, dramatic way, but in steady, quiet gestures. A call, a note, a conversation about a script, a reminder to stay grounded. That's what mentors do when cameras aren't rolling. They protect you from believing your own headlines. And then life moved forward. They didn't work together constantly after Good Will Hunting. Careers took different paths, but the bond remained not because of a film, but because of what had happened within it. Then came 2014. The news hit like a shockwave. Robin Williams had died. The world reacted instantly: shock, grief, disbelief. Tributes flooded television and social media. Actors spoke about his genius. Comedians spoke about his generosity. Directors spoke about his instinct. But for Matt Damon, the loss was quieter, more personal. In his first interview after Robin's passing, Matt struggled to speak without emotion, not because he was performing grief, because he was remembering. He spoke about the therapy scene, about how Robin had understood something without it being spelled out, about how he had pushed him, gently, deliberately, toward emotional honesty. "He knew I needed to go there," Matt said. And what made that statement powerful wasn't the story itself. It was the tone. There was no resentment, no sense of being manipulated, only gratitude. Robin hadn't crossed a line. He had crossed a distance. There's a difference. Over time, that scene from Good Will Hunting became iconic. Acting students dissected it. Critics analyzed its rhythm. Audiences revisited it for comfort. But for Matt, it wasn't just cinema. It was memory. Memory of being seen. Memory of being told repeatedly, something that landed beyond performance. "It's not your fault." The world saw an Oscar-winning performance. Matt remembered an act of human understanding. And maybe that's the real reason the scene endures. Because beneath the craft, beneath the accolades, beneath the legend, it captured something universal. The need to hear forgiveness. The difficulty of believing it. The courage required to say it until it's received. Robin Williams didn't just deliver a line 10 times. He stayed. And sometimes staying is the rarest gift of all. The legacy of a line that wouldn't let go. Some performances win trophies. Some performances win applause. And then there are a few rare moments in cinema that quietly enter people's lives and stay there. The therapy scene in Good Will Hunting became one of those moments. But its real legacy wasn't technical brilliance. It was permission. After the film's release, something unusual began happening. Therapists referenced the scene in sessions. Acting teachers used it in classrooms. Fathers mentioned it to sons. Sons mentioned it to fathers. Men who had never cried publicly admitted that those repeated words, "It's not your fault," hit something they didn't know how to name. And that's because the power of that moment wasn't cinematic. It was human. For Matt Damon, the years that followed were filled with success, franchise roles, international fame, stability. But that scene remained a kind of emotional anchor point in interviews, not because it made him famous. Because it changed him. You can hear it in the way he talks about Robin Williams, even decades later. There's reverence, yes, but more than that, there's affection. Robin didn't teach Matt how to cry on cue. He taught him something subtler, how to trust stillness, how to let silence breathe, how to allow vulnerability without apologizing for it. And that lesson outlived the production schedule. Robin had always carried a duality that fascinated people. On stage, he was kinetic energy, improvisation firing like lightning. Off stage, he was deeply attentive, a listener, observant, sensitive to shifts in emotional weather. In later years, when actors who worked with him reflected on their time together, a pattern emerged. Robin didn't dominate scenes to show off. He elevated them to reveal truth. He was generous with attention. He made younger actors feel safe. That safety is why the therapy scene works. You can't fake safety. You can fake tears. You can fake tension. You can fake vulnerability. But you cannot fake the feeling of being held without judgment. When Robin passed in 2014, the public grief was immense. Clips of his films played non-stop. His stand-up was replayed. Headlines celebrated his genius. But behind the headlines were quiet personal reckonings. For Matt, it wasn't just losing a co-star. It was losing someone who had seen him before the world did. There's a specific kind of gratitude reserved for people who show up at the beginning of your journey, before validation, before proof, before certainty. Robin had chosen to join a small film written by two unknown young men. He didn't need the role. He didn't need the exposure. He wanted the story. And in choosing that story, he chose them. That choice changed the trajectory of Hollywood careers. But more importantly, it modeled something. It modeled that greatness doesn't require ego. It modeled that mentorship isn't about authority, it's about attention. It modeled that sometimes the most powerful acting decision is not adding something dramatic, but removing resistance. Years after the Oscars, years after the press tour faded, that scene still circulates online. New generations discover it. They watch it without knowing the full backstory. They don't know about rehearsals. They don't know about improvisation. They don't know about off-camera conversations. They just feel it. And that's the final proof. Because legacy isn't built on trivia. It's built on impact. When young actors today are asked about performances that shaped them, that scene is mentioned. When directors talk about authenticity, that scene is referenced. When people speak about films that made them feel understood, that scene surfaces. Not because it's flashy, but because it's honest. Robin once said that comedy is acting out optimism. Drama is acting out truth. In that office chair, in that quiet room, he chose truth. And Matt met him there. What makes the moment timeless isn't the repetition of a line. It's the surrender to connection. Two actors, two chairs, one sentence, no armor. That's all it was. And yet it continues to ripple. In classrooms, in therapy offices, in living rooms, in private memories of people who watched it at the exact moment they needed to hear it. It's not your fault. Sometimes art doesn't solve pain. It names it. Sometimes mentorship doesn't fix someone. It stays long enough for them to feel seen. Robin Williams left behind a library of performances, wild, funny, brilliant. But perhaps his most enduring gift was quieter. He showed that strength can be gentle, that genius can be compassionate, that you can push someone toward truth without breaking them, and that the most powerful scenes in cinema are not about spectacle.